everybody! During the Malta expedition, we visited dozens of sites with ancient vehicle tracks, popularly known as mystery cart routes, and then we also visited most of the star-shaped fortifications on the island, which I found to be much more interesting for those who seek real mysteries, and which provided unexpected confirmation about the story of the survivors that I've been mentioning in my previous videos. So I decided to make this trip because of the supposedly mysterious, supposedly cart routes found all over Malta. Before visiting, from the information I could get access to, it seemed that people were studying them, and it seemed really confusing how carts could have left such ruts on the stone and all that. But upon arrival, it became clear that the vehicle tracks by themselves are not at all even at the slightest mysterious. It's pretty much obvious how they were left. And yes, there is a mystery connected with them, but the mystery is different. The mystery is what kind of vehicles could have left such tracks, and not how did they leave them. And the other mystery is who left these tracks, who were the people or the beings driving these vehicles. But there is very little discussion about the real mysteries, because from the very start people are channeled into these carts and how could carts leave such routes, which is absolutely irrelevant and is intentionally or unintentionally wasting people's time and diverting their attention from the actual question at hand. And while people are being bamboozled with an artificial, unreal mystery about the routes, at the same time their destruction is going on full speed. I mean the destruction of the tracks of the routes, although the other one is even more true as well, the destruction of everything human amongst humans. And because of this distraction, in future, even if somebody decides to sincerely study them and devotes time and energy, it will be much more difficult or impossible simply because there will be much fewer routes left. As far as the alleged mystery of how such tracks could be left in the stone, the answer is the most trivial thing you can imagine. They were left not in stone, but they were left when this surface was much softer, probably when it was just earth. That's exactly how they look, that's the only thing they look like, and that's what they are. They are tracks left on a soft surface. First of all, I want to show you why it is absolutely pointless to talk about carts and ruts left by wearing out the stone. And after that, I'll tell you whatever little that I could discover about the vehicles which might have left these tracks and their owners. First of all, I would like you to notice how deep are these tracks. I could sit or even lay down in them comfortably. They are huge for tracks. And to suggest that this has been worn out gradually by multiple carts passing over the same spot again and again, well, think a little bit how many thousands and probably millions of carts should have traversed the very same spot to leave these deep tracks. This is a whole lot of carts. I doubt that this small patch of land could have maintained a population that could use this much of a cart traffic. And we're not talking just a couple of isolated spots with deep ruts. Even today, despite the rapid destruction of the tracks, there are still over 100 sites. Some of them are entire fields covered with such tracks. There is really a whole lot of them. There is so many of them that I even tried looking at places where no cart routes have been reported or marked at any map. If I try hard and just go out in the fields where there is still stone surface left, here and there I would usually see small patches of tracks left. The rest has been eaten up by erosion, or it was never there, because when you drive any vehicle on land, it doesn't always leave a track. It leaves only where the earth is softer, otherwise it doesn't leave a track. So the amount of deep tracks itself, I don't know how many carts would you have needed to make them. Just you would have the full island stacked with carts, one on top of the other, this much amount of tracks. But then if you have that many carts, then how could they drive even? And then another point about the alleged carts leaving these tracks. Just imagine what kind of nightmare would be for any animal to try to pull anything on such surface. Their legs would get, broken on these turns and sharp stones. And this is, what is this? They call it hypothesis, okay, we don't say we are really right, we are just suggesting. What is the very meaning of hypothesis? In science, to claim that something is a hypothesis, you still need to have some evidence and you still need to present some reasoning behind it. This is the official definition. But what we have here at hand with this idea with the carts traversing repeatedly, this is absolute nonsense, disconnected from any observation or common sense. And to say, I'm saying it's just a hypothesis, it's not proven. I don't agree you can present it even as a hypothesis. It doesn't qualify even for that.
It's also worth mentioning that at some places the tracks are as much as thigh deep. If this were some cart or chariot, it would be pulling down on the animals as they try to drag it forward. No sensible person would try to travel in such a way. And just what kind of wheels did it have exactly? They must have been about 2 meters in radius, because anything smaller than that and the wheel axis in the middle would leave scrape marks on the side. And though many have been searching, not just Sylvie, no such marks have been found to date.
Not to even mention how would an imaginary cart make turns, especially at the places where the ruts are deep. This is not only not sensible, at places it would be simply impossible. And in general, just look at this terrain, the full concept that somebody would embark or think of driving a cart or any other similar primitive vehicle on such a bumpy terrain with sharp stones. This by itself is quite an outstanding idea, I must say, by itself. But still, so many scientific works have been written. How could have the carts have left such tracks on stone? This seems to be very mysterious. Well, they didn't. Moreover, if there were any animals or people dragging, pulling, pushing, or whatever the vehicles, they would have left their traces, and this is almost nowhere to be found. I say almost because there is one short track just at a couple of meters long, 3 segments of it at one particular location at Malta, where there are indeed such. This is the particular spot I'm talking about. The segments are pretty short, just a couple of meters each, and I specifically returned 2 times to study them. Yes, part of them could be interpreted as hoofs, hoof prints, definitely. But yet another part, like this one that you see now, very much resembles the quadratic marks that we saw in the middle of very similar tracks and roads in Spain and Italy. And now this looks hoof-like. In the beginning it was like quadrats, and then this really could be interpreted for a couple of meters as hoof marks. But this is really an isolated case, and if these are really indeed hoof marks, they only confirm that in general there were no animals dragging the vehicles, because you see, the animals can leave such tracks, but they don't in more than 99% of the time of the cases. Just to clarify, this particular field is very rich in tracks, and this is the only track that has such marks. All the others are normal, without any trace of hoofs or anything between the two tracks. This doesn't necessarily imply that they were high-tech vehicles driven by aliens and solar energy. It could have been something much more simple, like vehicles with sails, pretty much like ships. It's just a possibility. I don't have any reason to connect these vehicles with sails, but it is just one idea. First of all, I have heard that mainstream researchers suggest that even Romans had such land vehicles driven by sails, something like cars. I don't know if that's true, because any mainstream information about the so-called Romans is highly suspicious to me, but there could be something behind these things that they are telling us. There could be indeed some old reference. And secondly, such vehicles are not imaginary. I was reading then that on some islands on the Pacific in the very recent past, some 100 or so years ago, they made a small rail network with wagons that had sails and operated in this way very successfully. Now, if you still have any doubts left that there is a possibility that these were worn gradually in the stone by numerous carts or whatever vehicles passing repeatedly, look at this bump. This bump is no exception at all. It's one of the thousands or maybe even millions of bumps that have been trampled over by these tracks. And now just imagine all the thousands, if not millions, of cards that should have passed exactly at the top of this stone bump. I mean, who would drive? You need to stop and direct your animal to pass exactly in the middle of the peak of this bump. This is unreal. I mean, you wouldn't be able, even if you want to, you have to hold the cart and push it in the way exactly so that it should pass on the heap of the bump. And then after 3 meters is the next bump. And what, then you stop again? Well, if you drive through soft soil, this is just automatic. You go through and it is soft. It just forms this track that you see. It's absolutely crazy to suggest that this was left in uh, by wearing the stone gradually. And this stone is not soft, I must tell you. I'm not a geologist, a specialist, but I never saw ruts in very soft stone. I know what is very soft stone because I saw lots of that in Italy. You can break it off even with hand. There was nothing like this in Malta, and even specialists mainstream who have studied the ruts, they also say that they are either in medium soft stone or in very hard stone. So it's not some kind of soft stone like chalk where you can leave tracks like this easily. Here we have uneven terrain and the tracks go through, they follow the terrain, so it wasn't just the erosion which made it so bumpy recently. It was bumpy when the tracks were left as well, because they follow the ups and downs. For example, here where I'm standing, it goes up and down. Do you imagine what kind of nightmare would it be to drive any vehicle on such a terrain? I mean, is it really possible in terms of the normal carts we know? Even our modern cars wouldn't do it in such conditions. Yeah, maybe some specialized vehicles could do it, but to suggest that normal vehicles would pass moreover repeatedly on such a terrain, I think is quite ridiculous. Entire books have been published about the tracks by allegedly serious scientists who have been studying them for years on site. And you can find really very hilarious stuff inside. For example, one of them noted that one track fell into a ditch. The vehicle that left the track fell into a ditch. It's not so difficult if it was covered, if the holes were covered with vegetation as it is now. So the researcher noticed that one of the tracks, the vehicles fell into the ditch, and then another track running next to it got around the obstacle. It went around it. And yes, it's true, although it's a bit difficult to show it on photographs because it's not as three-dimensional as when you're there, but you can clearly see that the tracks follow the terrain. They go up and down as these bumps go up and down. So yes, the vehicles were sometimes going into holes in the ground. So what they're suggesting that since according to them the tracks were surely worn in the stone, so what, 5,000 vehicles fell into the same ditch, always following the same track with very little deviation, with just few centimeters of deviation, and after breaking 10,000 carts in the very same hole, they decided, oh, let's go around it. It's much more normal to see the obvious. One vehicle fell in the ditch and the next one went around it. Some of the routes were traversed by multiple vehicles and you can clearly see their imprints parallel next to each other on my footage. But yet other tracks are very clear and you can see just maybe one vehicle passed and left it in the soil. And then in these types of books, they will suggest another so-called hypothesis to you. I don't think it's a hypothesis. I think it's just another way of wasting your time and deviating your attention from the actual subject. And that is that this could have been carved into the stone, like some sort of rails.
And although there are segments of tracks that are of uniform size, you cannot base a so-called hypothesis just on part of the observations. You have to see them all. Otherwise, you will not see the reality that these tracks are completely unfit for any type of rail. They just start out of nowhere, they end abruptly, they overlap each other.
But on the other side, for the sake of clarity, I must clarify that there were a couple of rock-cut canals in the area with the tracks. They seem to be younger than the tracks because in many cases they cross them. And they clearly have chisel marks on the sides. Although it's hard to say from photographs, when you visit them, you cannot mistake them on the spot for being vehicle tracks. They are single, they are clearly made for channeling water, they run from a place to a place. The tracks are distinctly different from them. They are absolutely unfit for channeling anything because they go up and down. A liquid cannot flow in them, and also they appear and disappear. They cannot hold water or liquid. But if I have not seen anybody providing an image for the alleged hypothesis that these are channels or something else or rails cut in the rock, but if somebody ever shows you photograph, probably it will be from one of these canals. So if somebody claims that the roots were carved, probably it's just a misunderstanding, because sometimes there are canals like this one, and this is definitely carved. There are chisel marks on the side, but when you're here on the side, you cannot mistake it for a rut. Like these are proper ruts here. Here. Some of them are on the side. Even this is a rut here. But this is not a rut. This is definitely not a rut. It is simply a drainage canal. It continues on the top. And there are few more such canals here. So again, when you are on the spot, you can distinguish between canals and ruts very easily. But if somebody is showing you a single photograph on internet, there could be a confusion. This is another bigger canal for drainage, crossing the ruts, the older ruts. I understand that looking just at the pictures and videos on the internet can be confusing, but if a person has personally been there and has seen the tracks and still is talking to you about them being cut in the rock for rails or them being channels, I would doubt the integrity of this person and his intentions. Is he really seeking the truth? But as far as the people who are writing books and talking about the mystery and how cards could have worn out these tracks in the rock, although it all this sounds ridiculous when you see the tracks, I don't think they're deliberately misleading anybody. I think they simply they're not brave enough within themselves to leave the small box of the artificial reality in which we are indoctrinated to believe by our educational system and by our upbringing. And how is that? Because seeing the tracks for what they are immediately calls for a serious revision of the entire ancient history as we know it from school, because the tracks are very old. At least everybody who studied them agrees about this point. And in those faraway times, people should not have had vehicles that operate without being pulled or pushed by an animal or a man. But there is no trace, no imprint of anybody or anything dragging, pulling, or pushing. And on the top of that, as we are gonna see later on in this video, apparently this seems to have been suspension vehicles. And not only that, taking the tracks for what they are, vehicle imprints left in the soft soil probably, or I don't know, other soft material, dust or something, I cannot say for sure, that will also immediately open another very unpleasant chapter for those who don't want to go out of the small box, and that is the shaky situation of the mainstream geology, which seems to be as correct as the mainstream history, which means around zero. And why so? Because then it will open the question, then how did it petrify so quickly? We are always told that petrification, especially in such large scales like a full island, should take ages and ages, maybe even millions of years. Yes, but this is only if you read the popular versions of the supposedly scientific theories about petrification. If you read in detail the scientific works, you will find out that everything is highly questionable. These are not really theories, these are just hypotheses and opinions, and there are many facts that openly contradict them, like, for example, items. Artifacts attributed to the supposedly dynastic times of Egypt that are already petrified. They shouldn't have been if the theories that we are told were really theories. Actually, they are ideas which don't seem to be much confirmed about the reality around. Also, I heard about. What was it, a gate attributed to the Hittites that is now solid stone, but actually it was wooden when it was made, things like that. So petrification doesn't seem to be that slow as they are telling us after all. Or maybe it did not even happen gradually. Maybe the tracks are ancient, but not that extremely ancient, because the destruction and the petrification could have been not a result of natural causes, but, for example, a result of a weapon. We have abundance of historic records about very powerful weapons used in the past that could change entire areas, turn them into desert, or even petrify them. And indeed, places where advanced civilizations thrived that were tropical are now desert, like Egypt. It is well proven that it was tropical and lush during the times that we usually call dynastic. How did it turn into a desert so quickly? We are told that the deserts take millions of years to form. And the same stuff in South America. Once civilizations were thriving, they are telling us there was lush greenery, and surprise, surprise, all of a sudden exactly that spot turned into a desert again. This type of topics from the field of geology and history, they don't want us to inquire into, they don't want us to investigate, and that's why from the very beginning they are putting us on this stupid train of this made-up mystery of how cards who could have worn this in the stone, and people follow this line of thinking instead of studying the actual vehicle tracks. Before going to Malta, and just by reading the available material, one thing was very puzzling to me. Okay, so many researchers have been there, some of them famous and even supposedly alternative, and they're telling us that there is a mystery. But why don't they show us this mystery so well? The images and comprehensive footage was extremely scarce. This was very puzzling to me. Why? They're telling us there is a mystery, but they're not showing us the mystery in detail. This was somewhat odd. But when I saw the alleged mystery, I understood why they are not showing us images, because the images will speak for themselves. And that is why I decided, along with these two 3-part documentary to publish also 4 separate videos with the raw footage alone. You can find links to them in the description of this video. I want people to see the vehicle tracks, the ruts as they are, and think for themselves, am I telling them the truth or not? And what is the actual mystery about them? And while this small talk is distracting the public attention from studying the actual vehicle tracks, their distraction goes with full speed right now. This is, for example, people dumping garbage on them. There is no law to protect them. Here, for example, there are things built on them, and newer piles of stone show that something more will be built on them very soon. And as usual, the standard excuse, keep out private property. I do understand that Malta is very small. It's terribly overpopulated. People literally have no place to live. I felt pity for them. So the destruction of the tracks is justified to some extent. But why don't, for example, they require taking photographs of them and recording them before people start building on them or putting their gardens on them? Because that's what people do in Malta. They don't really have proper soil, so when they want to make a garden, they have to bring soil from elsewhere, and this happens on the top of the vehicle tracks. And this is on the other side of this pile. Somebody has brought soil here and is growing something. But all this pretending to be spaced out, I mean the authorities, and allowing the tracks to be destroyed by construction and agriculture, is not by chance. Even in the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Malta, I saw tracks covered by cement, by paths built for the tourists, as if they are absolutely unimportant. So even at their archaeological sites, they treat the tracks with such negligence and disrespect. While at the same time, those very same UNESCO centers, protected areas, have luxurious centers covered on the top, everything. They create the impression they want to preserve everything so meticulously. And what do they preserve? Monkey-style walls that are actually recent construction. It is honestly written even on the labels. Strange enough, this construction, whatever reconstruction, doesn't look like the smooth megaliths of which we see less and less because of the low quality work that is going on them under the banner of preservation. And one thing I find very funny in the works of all these researchers who write long books or other materials wondering how could have cards worn out these ruts in the stone, almost all of them at some point would write a short remark, and they look exactly as if they were imprinted in a soft mud or soft soil, something like that. It's the same like saying, look at this, it looks exactly like a penguin, doesn't it? But according to my understanding of things, it should be some sort of a squirrel. And then he writes a thick scientific volume about how it looks like a penguin, but it's actually squirrel because the tail, it's modified and all this evolution, and it's full of scientific terms, and you barely understand it, and you have to believe it because it's written by a scientist. But at the end of the day, they not only look like penguins, they really are penguins. And even if you print 1000 volumes with scientific nonsense about squirrels, they will still remain penguins. Okay, so this much on what the vehicle tracks of Malta are not. In the next episode, I will show you whatever little I could find out about what they actually are. I hope to complete the documentaries about Malta before I leave for my next very long trip that will be to South Asia. I want to meet the famous healers, the so-called psychic surgeons who penetrate people's bodies with bare hands and take out tumors and other nasty stuff out. That will take me some time, so during that period I won't be able to publish any videos probably. Or I will try to take raw footage on the spot and publish it without making it into a documentary. Let's see if I could do that. Please feel free to reload these videos about Malta to your YouTube channel. No special permission is needed for that as long as the documentary remains in its original form without any changes or additions or whatever alterations whatsoever.